All right, so lesson 73, we'll see about Peter's denial, and then Jesus going before Pilate, and that will go into another lesson as well. So John chapter 18 is where we'll start. So remember last time Jesus was in the garden. He was taken away. Peter tried to defend him. The disciples scattered when Jesus allowed himself to be taken by those soldiers. He was brought before Annas and then Caiaphas. What were some of the things that were illegal that the Sanhedrin was doing? Did we say what were some aspects? Kenton? Okay, trials at night, illegal. Jess or Micah? Okay, it was at the palace, not in the court building where it should be. Jennifer? Okay, it was private. And also, the other aspect was he was arrested, brought in, trial began before he was even accused of anything. They couldn't find anything to bring against him. So, now so he's taken away, he's there, and now let's go to, it's still nighttime. Okay, the deep part of the night, there's not, the sun is not coming up yet, and Jesus obviously needs to be rejected by the Jews, his people here. Well, we'll start out with Simon Peter. Okay, so verses 15 and 16 first here in John chapter 18. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Let's just stop there just to set the scene here. So the disciples all scattered. You can imagine them in the darkness of night running off, and if you scattered and went away, where would you run to hide in that garden of Gethsemane? What kind of hiding place might you find? Jesse? Bushes. Garrett, where might you go? Tree. Okay. Maybe there's a building there. But you go to hide. And then what are you doing from your hiding spot? Kenton? Praying. That would be a great thing to do. Logan? Watching. You want to know what exactly is going on. What are they doing to your master over there? And so from the darkness you peer out from the bushes, behind the tree, or behind the building. And there you see they begin to take him away. So now what do? You're hiding in the darkness, behind a bush, watching them. Slowly they're going off into the distance. And Megan? Yep, you've got some options. Maybe you go home. We want to save your own skin. You don't want to be caught. So you go off and go home. Or, as Megan said, maybe you slowly in the darkness follow along and creep along. Maybe even whisper, hey, and say the names of the other fellows that are there. We see that Simon Peter joins up with another disciple. And then when they get to that palace there's going to be a gatekeeper. The one disciple, whose name we don't know, was recognized by the gatekeeper as one that followed Jesus. And so he allowed him to come in, whereas Peter stood outside at the gate. Okay. When that one disciple got in there a ways, he probably realized that Peter was no longer with him. He turns around and he goes back out to the door and speaks unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Okay. So now the one disciple, unknown to us, comes back and vouches for Peter. Says, no, this man is with me. He can come too, to the damsel there by the door. And then we have verse 17. Then saith the damsel that kept the door unto Peter, Art not thou also one of this man's disciples? He saith, I am not. Jesus, here Peter denies who he is. He's waiting outside the door. So we have that damsel there. Okay? Go in your Bibles to Matthew. So you got to keep a finger here, but you got it. Well, you don't have to keep a finger there, but go back to Matthew chapter 26. Long chapter. We go to 71 and 72. So first he denies there at the doorway. And then he gets in the palace. And probably, as in most cases back then, there was probably a large courtyard down below. And that's where Jesus and Annas, Caiaphas, and the Sanhedrin were meeting. And probably there was a second story with a balcony all the way around. And we can imagine Peter being up on that balcony. Okay? Or somewhere along the edge of the porch, maybe in the bottom, in the shadows, in the darkness, slinking along, trying to see what's going on with his master. But then look at verses 71 and 72. And when he was gone out into the porch, now he's in that area where he can see Jesus. Another maid saw him and said unto them that were with there, this fellow was also a Jesus of Nazareth. So one of the girls recognizes him. Look at this man. Hey, this is one of his followers with that Jesus of Nazareth, that guy over there that they're accusing. And Peter right away, and he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. I swear. Foolishness. We may not swear on things. Some people will swear on my grandmother's grave or on my mother's grave. I swear on my father's name. That's sin to do that. But Peter here does that. I make an oath before you, I do not know that man. And then go to the next couple of verses here. And after a while came unto him that stood by. Actually, what I want to do before we get to that third one, let's go to Mark chapter 14. I had you look that up because that gives one other little piece of evidence. And 14, that's a lengthier one too. Verse 68. And this is going back to that, the maid. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked upon him and said, art thou also wast with Jesus of Nazareth? But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. And he went out into the porch, and the cock crew. What should that have been a reminder of to Peter? Micah? Yeah, the cock crows once. So before it's going to crow again, Jesus is going to deny Peter. It should have been an alarm that should have sent off bells and whistles in Peter's mind. But he was so vehement, he was so, and this is where we talked about in our devotion this morning, so self-righteous, so confident in himself and what he is, even though he's in the wrong, he's going to vehemently deny it because he's being self-righteous in a sense here. That's what we need to be cautious of too. Sometimes we get on the wrong side of something and we don't want to admit it and we'll just go forward gung-ho blindly. Be so self-righteous, thinking, I know what's right. I know more than you. Don't tell me how things are. And that's what Peter is doing here. So that even when an obvious sign comes to him, he ignores it. Now we can go back to Matthew chapter 26 and continue on with those last couple of verses there. So he denied the second time. He swore an oath even. And then the third time, verse 73, and after a while came unto him that stood by and said to Peter. So Peter was again somewhere in that courtyard. They probably had areas where it was cold. It's the nighttime. Fires were going. And men could stand around, women could stand around and hold their hands out and turn themselves around and warm themselves by the fire. And it's there by those that stood by. They say to Peter, surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. If a person walked in here from the city of Boston, you would definitely be able to tell where they're from by the way that they spoke. They would speak with a whole different dialect. Or a gentleman walked in here from the state of Texas. His speech would betray him. He's a man from Texas. Even though he spoke English, he's an American. You'd definitely be able to tell. And so that is here. Peter's a Galilean from way up in the north, and his speech betrayed him from where he was from. And they say, now you were one of them. Your speech gives you away. You were one of them that followed after this man that they're accusing in there. Verse 74, and Peter even more self-righteously, even more vehement, says in verse 74, then he began to curse and swear, saying, I know not the man. So we can imagine him saying, I do not know him. I take an oath and I will swear. Sin on the part of Peter. We may not do that when we become so full of ourselves, but Peter does that. And immediately the cock crew, that's the second time. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, which said unto him, verse 75, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. We've learned some things about Peter along the way. What are some of the traits of Peter? What's one trait, Joe, of Peter that we've learned? Hey, often he doesn't stop to think. Good. What's Peter's view of himself? How does he view himself? Garrett? Very highly, right? He's very proud. Before Peter can go out, Peter will be a great apostle. Jesus even says, upon this rock will I build my church. Rock there being Peter, symbolizing something else. But still giving us that Peter, as one of the disciples who Jesus loved, will be a great apostle and do many great, wonderful, and marvelous things. We have his writings here in the Scriptures. But Peter needs to be humbled. We think of a mountaintop, a man on top of a mountain, saying, look at how great I am. Look what I've accomplished. And he's so full of himself that Jesus, and God specifically, needs to humble Peter. He needs to strip away all of Peter's pride and show him how base and lowly he is. And now, when Peter goes out, he will never again climb that mountain of pride and sin and full of himself, self-righteousness like he was. He won't do that again. But now he's been humbled by the Lord, and he knows that. That is the purpose of what God is doing here. Not to make Peter feel bad. Not to, well, in a sense to make him feel bad, but not so that he feels though I've sinned so terribly and horribly I can't possibly be a child of God. It's not what he's saying. He does that here. Okay? God humbles him. And sometimes we need to be humbled too. We become so proud of ourselves. And God works in our lives to make us based, to lower us once again, to remind us that we aren't all as great as we think we are. Okay? Now, we also, where does that say that? Is that in Luke? Find that there. So if we go to Luke chapter 22, you don't have to go there right now, I'll just read this to you. And Peter said, Man, I know not what thou sayest, and immediately spake, and the cock crew. That was the second time, so Peter is weeping in the Lord. So Jesus must have been taken along the way, or somewhere in the courtyard where he could make eye contact with Peter. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. Jen, ever sitting there in church, maybe not paying attention, or maybe even acting foolishly, and mom and dad lean forward and look down at you and give you a look. And what does a look mean, Jen? Yeah, knock it off, right? All we need is a look sometimes. We don't need anything else. You're sitting at the dinner table at someone else's house. They've invited you over. And maybe mom knows that's not your favorite meal on their plate, and you're about to open your mouth, and they look across you and make eye contact like, don't dare you say anything. Eye contact can say many things. And this eye contact here from Jesus is not meant to say to Peter, I told you so and I hate you, like we would say maybe to someone who had said something mean about us. Rather, it's a reminder. Peter knows he had to be taken all the way down, humbled, before God will begin to build him back up to the great calling that he has. And so that look is just enough there, that look done by Jesus toward Peter. So, we have that. Okay. Now, let's go to Matthew chapter 27 then. Not already there. You probably are, but Matthew chapter 27. And let's see what happens before Pilate here. Okay. When the morning was come, so now the darkness of the night is over. There's a sliver of light off in the distance. Pale blue with some maybe ripples of yellow and orange out there beginning to show on the horizon. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. So they bring him to Pilate. They've done their work as a Sanhedrin. They've got an accusation against this man. They've come to a conclusion. They've heard him blaspheme God's name by saying he is God. So they take him away now to the Roman governor so that Pilate can do his work. Because although the Sanhedrin can find men guilty, and although the Sanhedrin could even put them in prison, they cannot condemn them to death. That must be sanctified by the Roman governor. Pilate is put there by Emperor Caesar. He is put there in that position to be the leader. And so that's Pilate's place. God has ordained exactly who will be where at what time, and Pilate is here. Okay, so he's brought before Pilate. And then, if we go to Luke chapter 23, we get a little bit more detailed visual of what's going on here. So again, starting at verse 1 of chapter 23, and the whole multitude of them arose and led him unto Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. And Pilate asked him, saying, Art thou the King of the Jews? Then he answered him and said, Thou sayest it. Then said Pilate to the chief priest and to the people, I find no fault in this man. And they were the more fierce, saying, He stirreth up a people, teaching throughout Jewry, beginning from Galilee to this place. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. So let's stop there. Okay. They brought the accusation. We found this fellow perverting the nation. How is he doing that? Or in their minds, how is he doing that? He's not, but in the Jews' mind, how is he perverting the nation? What? Megan? Yeah, but what does it mean to pervert the nation? Garrett?
You could do wrong and be bad, teach it the wrong things.
Yeah, you're starting to get there. You're filling the nation with improper ideas. In other words, it's as though Jesus is building, right, an earthly kingdom. That's what it looks like to the Jews, but Jesus wants a heavenly kingdom. But by feeding 4,000 people and by healing all these people, all the other people want Jesus to do what, Logan? Earthly kingdom, and that kingdom would obviously overtake the Roman kingdom. So he is perverting the nation, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. So second thing, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar. What did Jesus actually say? If we go back to his words, What did he actually say about giving taxes in Caesar? Hannah, what did he say? Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. So they're saying, well, the God which is God's part. He's saying, don't give it all to Caesar, and that he himself is a king. Well, any man who makes himself a king is saying he's higher than you, Pilate. He's setting himself up to be a ruler, higher than the emperor, because only the emperor can do this. See, Pilate, look at all of these things that he's saying. So Pilate turns to Jesus. Art thou the king of the Jews? Are you ruler of these people? And Jesus answered him kind of with a confusing question. Thou sayest it. Okay. Pilate looks at the people and says, I find no fault in this man. What's he doing? Okay. Nothing wrong with that. He was afraid of Jesus. Okay. Pilate knew he was afraid of Jesus, but he was also afraid of the Jews. He knew the power of Jesus, but he also knew that if the Jews became upset, he might lose his cushy, posh position there as the ruler put there by the Roman emperor. So he's afraid on both sides. He doesn't know quite what to do. He wants to be neutral, but he's not. He thinks he can get out of this. So instead, he sends him off to Herod. Oh, Galilean. Well, I don't know all the rules and laws of you Jews, Pilate says. Why don't I send him off to King Herod? King Herod, he knows all about your laws and rules, so he'll be able to take care of it. He's trying to pass the buck. Get rid of the problem. Verse 8, and when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceeding glad, for he was desirous to see him of a long season, because he had heard many things of him, and he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Herod views Jesus as a magic show. That's what Herod views Jesus as, a man who could do all these wonders and miracles and great things, but not from a godly sense or worshiping God, but from a sense of humanistic awe and surprise. And wow, what is he doing? What a marvelous thing. And so that's the attitude of Pilate here. Verse 9, then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. So Jesus kept silence. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. And Herod with his men of war set him at naught and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him again to Pilate. Oh, he says, king, you guys accuse him of king. Well, let's make the man a king. Put on a purple robe, right? Crown of thorns. Mock him, scourge him. That would be taking a Roman whip with some metal tips in the end and beating him across his back. Okay? So they're trying to do all those things there as well. But he sends him back to Pilate because there's nothing that he can find wrong with him. Now I told you to look up Matthew chapter 27, verse 19. What happened there to Pilate's wife? What happened to Pilate's wife there? Faith? Good or bad dreams, Faith? So much so that she went to her husband and said, there, I've got a bad feeling about this man. Leave him alone. Have nothing to do with this man. For if you say something, I have a bad feeling, a bad omen. Remember, these are very superstitious people. Something bad is going to happen. So don't have anything to do with this man. Okay? Well then, what did Herod offer? Back to Matthew now, chapter 27. What was Herod or Pilate's offer to the Jews? Well, I know how to get out of this. What did he try to do? Jesse? Well, he did do that. That is true, but not quite yet. He tried to come up with a different solution. Logan? Verse 15. Now at that feast, the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner whom they would. So that time of year, the governor had permission to release one prisoner, whoever the people wanted released. Maybe there was somebody they felt unjustly was put into prison, or for whatever reason they want to release. So he thinks, well, I know. I can kind of direct this here. Let's see, who's in my prisons? Oh yes, that wicked man Barabbas, who's killed and murdered and done all kinds of heinous sins. The people hate him, and he strikes fear into the hearts of the men and women. I know. I'll tell the people, well, tell you what, I'll give you a choice. You can have Jesus in prison and Barabbas free, or you can have Barabbas in prison and Jesus free. And Pilate thinks this is a slam dunk. No problem at all. The people will want to pick Jesus free because that man Barabbas is such a scary and heinous fellow. And here we see the foolishness, just how much hatred is in the hearts of the Jews, the Israelites here. Who do they choose to have freed? Kimberly? They say Barabbas. You can imagine the color draining out of the face of Pilate. Now what have I done? Now what have I done? If this man goes out and commits all kinds of crimes, I might be held responsible for this. But he's made a deal with the people, and a deal must be kept. And so Barabbas is released. Okay? Pilate then, after that, yes, he goes on. Verse 22, Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? All right, fine, I released you, Barabbas. Now what should I do? They all say unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor saith, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Then released he Barabbas unto them. When he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. The soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers, and they stripped him, put on a scarlet robe, and when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, a reed in his hand, and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. Pilate here, I can find nothing wrong with this man. He is a just man. I wash my hands, and the foolishness of the Jews saying, Yes, Pilate, we get it. We understand. You don't want to be falsely accused. If something comes back, if the emperor comes back and say, What is this just man being crucified for? We'll take the blame on us. Almost going back to that time of Judah or Reuben, telling his father, I'll take the blood of Benjamin on the guilt on my family if something happens to him. That's what these Jews are trying to do here. The blood be on us and our children. It's foolish because they're condemning themselves. They've put a just man, a holy man, and they're going to hang him on the cross and destroy him. Just like we talked about in devotions, let us not be self-righteous. Let us not be Phariseistic and say, boy, I'm glad I didn't live then because I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have wanted to hang Jesus. No, we all would have too. We would have gone along with the crowd. We too would have shouted out, crucify him, crucify him. So make sure that we're careful about doing that too, not seeing ourselves so self-righteous. Or I wouldn't have denied Jesus if I was Peter, but yet I would have. My own sinful human nature would have made me do it. So we need to be careful there. But we'll see what happens next time. So Pilate washes his hands, hands Jesus over. Pick it up there.